Well, hello, and welcome back to that thing we like to call Curlis Mania, where we talk all things pop rock and prog. We're going to talk prog today, but before we do that, I want to welcome back my esteemed guest to the channel, Bicyclelegs. How are you, Bicyclelegs?
Yeah, great, Tom. It's great to be back on the channel. I really enjoyed our last show that we did, the Split Ends one, so I'm really looking forward to this one too.
Absolutely. We had a great time and afterwards I said, "Hey, we have to do another video because that was too much fun." And I think I'm not sure, I can't remember. I was thinking about this today. I'm not sure how we stumbled on this topic, but I'm really happy we did. Because maybe it was just a love of Yes. I can't remember what it was. So I guess we'll start with that, right? Why don't we just dive in and say, hey, what was your introduction to Yes? What was the first time you heard Yes, the first time that you were excited about Yes? Let's start with
Yeah.
that.
Well, I mean, for me, the first thing I heard with Yes was Owner of a Lonely Heart. That was a big hit, 1983, 1984. Um, and that was, this was before I'd really discovered progressive music. That would come a year later in 1985. I've told this story on my channel before, but I was in the Scouts at the time, and we were raising money to send myself and a couple other boys to the Scout Jamboree. And one of the things we were doing was having a big, like, yard sale or garage sale, as we call it here. And the parents were all donating stuff to sell at this yard sale. And we were keeping it in our house because we had a big double garage under the house. And somebody donated a big box of records. And one night I grabbed this box of records and put it next to my mother's stereo, put the headphones on, and just started pulling records out at random and listening to them. And that night I discovered Brain Salad Surgery by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Starless and Bible Back by King Crimson, and Story of I by Patrick Moraz. So it was like my introduction to progressive music, because progressive music had died by the mid 80s,
It
you
had.
know.
Yes, yes. Yep.
So I'd never been introduced to it. So it was a real eye opener for me. And then about a year later, I think 1986, I had this older friend by the name of John Keelstra, and sadly no longer with us. But he gave me a copy of Fragile, and I listened to that, and there was no looking back after that. So
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. No, I mean what a garage sale gift that was, right? Like I mean with
yeah,
to get a whole new bin of records like that. Oh,
mm,
that's like a Christmas present early. Uh,
yeah,
for me, for as a kid, as a 13-year-old, I mean, this was what I dreamed about as a 13-year-old, having all these records and like just being able to listen to whatever I wanted. That was my dream. Um, but yes, for me, was I think that my sister either owned, I had three older sisters, they're quite older. The closest one is 6 years older than me. So my oldest sister, I think, had either loaned a copy, someone loaned her a copy, or she owned a copy of Yes songs. And that was the first time I had heard Yes, was this sort of triple live album. And I was like, wow, this band must be important. They got a triple album and they have this full color booklet inside. And I just remember like poring over that album, and all the artwork, the Roger Dean artwork is kind of mysterious and like, what is this album? Who is this band? And then hearing the music just, of course, just blew my mind. And I just became a Yes fan after that, pretty much. So most of my life. I mean, I've been a Yes fan since I was like 10 years old. So it's been
yeah,
one of those constant bands for me. And
yeah.
like you said, I even loved the whole, Trevor Rabin incarnation. I went to go see I loved Owner of a Lonely Heart. I went to see Big Generator in New Jersey. I saw them live. Um, so yeah, I've always been a big Yes fan, but we're here to talk about two records that, they get talked about, but not enough, in my opinion. And I brought this. I'm really happy we're talking about these albums because I bought this album. Not this is a reissue of the debut recently, and this is a music on vinyl expanded edition, and it's yeah, there you go. There it is.
Yeah.
And it's boy, and I don't really talk about fidelity that much, but I put this on, and man, does this sound good. It sounds fantastic. Um, but I would just cranked it up and I said, "Oh my God, this record is so good." And like I don't remember seeing it high on people's lists ever. It always like kind of languishes in the middle somewhere. And people will say, "Oh yeah,
Mm.
the debut is pretty promising, it's pretty good." Um, and then we're here to talk about the follow-up to that, which was It's Time in a Word, which was the following year, 1970, I believe. Um,
Yeah.
Yes. So the debut is 69 and this is 70. And this is where they, start adding strings. So some orchestra type sounds here. But we're gonna get it. So that's the battle, is it's sort of a battle as we call it, against the debut versus Time in a Word. So I guess at this point I'll just, there's not much history to talk about. We can just dive into the records at this point. So I'm gonna hand it over to Bicycle Legs for his take on the debut.
Yeah, well, the first thing is we got this cover here for the debut album.
Oh yes.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
completely different cover, non-gatefold. That
Mhm.
was inside the gatefold, that sort of blurb. But
Mhm.
on here, it's the back cover. So yeah, I mean, both of these albums had two different covers because you can see the other Time and the Word cover there in the background, which
Yes.
actually has Steve Howe on it, even though he's not on that record.
Exactly. Yes.
So
And yes, because Peter Banks is on the back. So there you go.
yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, the debut album, I think, definitely needs to more recognition.
Mhm.
This is obviously the original lineup of the band. You've got John Anderson, Chris Squire, Tony Kaye, Peter Banks, and Bill Bruford. All of them except Peter Banks inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and that I think is a real disgrace that they didn't include Peter Banks when they inducted Yes into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But it starts off with Beyond and Before, and talk about a band announcing itself to the world with its first track. It's a song that was written sort of pre-Yes, I believe, because it's written by Chris Squire and Clive Bailey, and Clive Bailey was in a previous band that Chris Squire was in. I don't know whether it was The Sin or whether it was Mabel Greer's Toy Shop, but they were bandmates in like a previous band before, like Mabel Greer's Toy Shop kind of evolved into Yes, as it were.
Yes. Yep. Sort of morphed into it. Yep. Yep.
So it's a wonderful track, and it starts right at the beginning. You get what this early Yes sound would be like. It wasn't the sort of swirling progressive kind of sound that we would get with Fragile or Close to the Edge. That hadn't kind of really been invented yet,
Mhm.
but it's definitely exploratory. That you can tell that these guys know how to play their instruments, and you get the beautiful harmonies. I remember seeing an interview with Bill Bruford. I think it's on one of the Yes documentaries from the 90s or the early 2000s or something like that. And he was talking about how he was of the opinion right from the beginning that this was a vocal group. So you had this wonderful blending of John and Chris's voices, and you get Peter Banks would be in the mix for those harmonies as well. But to me, the secret sauce with Yes, as it were, has always been that vocal blend between John and Chris. So, and you
Absolutely.
get it, and you get it right from the beginning with this wonderful, wonderful song. And it goes through these little movements. It starts off quite sort of bold and loud, and then it gets into a quieter section, and then it plays with the form, and I like that. It gives you real great introduction into what this early Yes sound was going to be like.
Yeah, they really come sprinting out of the gate, like you said, they really do. And you put the needle down and it's immediately it's that, wow, who is the bass player?
Mm,
I mean, it's just that ding 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 ding. It's so loud in the mix, and you're like, oh my God, who is the bass player? I don't think I'd ever heard bass that loud in a song before.
mm. Yeah, probably the only thing I can think of is that single that the Beatles did, Paperback Writer and Rain,
Oh yes,
you know,
yeah.
where the bass is really, really high up in the mix.
Mhm. Yes, because I think they didn't the Beatles say something like, we want us our stuff to sound like Motown. It has you can hear the bass.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So what a great, yeah, what a great way to start the debut.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
And then of course you get with both of these albums, which is something that you really wouldn't get on later Yes albums, is you get cover versions.
Yes.
Because, you know, Yes basically started off as a covers band, you
Mhm.
know, and then introduced original songs as they went along.
Mhm.
But they started off doing these sort of extended psychedelic sort of cover versions. And you get one here with I See You, which is a cover version of a Birds song.
Mhm.
And it's a great cover too. The thing about Yes is they didn't do straight covers. They kind of reinvented the songs that they covered. I
Mhm.
mean, even if you think a little later on, they did a cover of Simon and Garfunkel's America, and that's absolutely wonderful. But they reinvent that song.
Yes, they totally,
So,
yes, absolutely.
but and they do that again here with the Birds. Although again, this song really lends itself because it's a Birds song, and the Birds were a vocal band with harmonies and all that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Again, it really lends itself to that sort of, you know, the blend between John and Chris's voices and all that sort of thing. And you get some wonderful jazzy guitar from Peter Banks in this song. You know,
Yes, I love
people
it.
people talk about, you know, again, I think Peter Banks gets overlooked. He was overlooked in Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but I think he gets overlooked in sort of Yes history as well.
Mhm.
He and I think we'll talk a little bit about why that might be when we talk about Time and a Word.
Right. Right.
But on this song, you know, to me, the solo he plays on this is the equal of anything that in those sort of early Yes records with Steve Howe.
Mhm.
You know, that really sort of jazzy thing. You know, Steve Howe did that a lot too. If you think about the solo on Yours Is No Disgrace,
Mhm.
you know, I
Right.
to me, the solo on this and the solo on Yours Is No Disgrace, very similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I just love, like you said, he's got that jazzy touch too. I mean, he's doing all these different chords and they're all very clean and they're one after another. And like you said, I when I listen to this record, I go, wow, Peter Banks, listen to that. I feel the same way.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
you know.
So
And
yeah, I
it's so
mean
great that
it's
I See You by the Birds. I mean, what a great cover too.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They chose really good songs to cover on this record in particular.
Mhm.
Um, Yesterday and Today is that sort of beautiful John Anderson ballad that he would do in these early days. We'll
Mhm.
talk about a few of these as we go along in
Mhm.
these two records, but this is a really lovely song. It's got a really light touch, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And his vocal is just fantastic on this. So
Yeah.
delicate and so beautiful and so melodic. Oh my God.
Yeah, and that's the thing we've got to talk about John Anderson's vocals on these first two records too, because he sounds like John Anderson, you know, the John Anderson that we know and love, but he's not quite as high up as he would get on some of those later records on sort of Fragile and Close to the Edge and
Hmm.
things like that.
Yeah.
He's a little lower in his register, you know, but he still recognizably sounds like John Anderson.
Yes.
And and you know his vocal is so delicate on this song. That's what I really love about it.
So beautiful. Such a beautiful track.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And then
then
we head straight
you
into Looking Around, which is like,
yeah,
oh.
Yeah, it's a great way to end side one, isn't it? I mean, just as the opening track made a statement, I feel like the closing track on side one makes a statement too. You know, it's got that wonderful diddle 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 diddle. You know,
Because right into
yeah,
the riff, yeah.
you know, Tony Kaye. You know, I know they would sort of let him go after the Yes album because he was, you know, he didn't want to embrace mellotrons and synthesizers and all that sort of thing. But
Mhm.
man, what a Hammond organ player Tony Kaye was. You know,
Absolutely.
just, you know,
Hmm.
I don't think it's hyperbole to put him up there with, you know, Keith Emerson and people like that. Maybe not the chops, but the tone and the texture and all that sort of thing. Just
Yeah.
phenomenal.
No, I agree with you. When I listen to this record, I can tell that he's like you said, maybe he doesn't have the Keith Emerson chops, but he's definitely, he's going for that Keith Emerson thing and he gets it. I mean, the tone,
Mm,
like you said, the tone and the sound are very Emerson. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
And you know, this is John Anderson and Chris are writing together too, which would, you know, for the next few records, that would be sort of the main songwriting team until it sort of became John Anderson and Steve Howe later on. But yeah, it's a great song to you know, it really sort of kicks you in the face and says, right, so that's side one over with, you know.
Absolutely. It's a great way to end side one for sure. I love Looking Around. It's one of my favorite songs on the record.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. So then
Yeah.
we get on to side two and we've got Harold Land. This is a bit more of a lower tempo song. It's not quite a ballad. This has got a bit of a psychedelic feel to it. Tells a little story about this guy. You get a writing credit from Bill Bruford on this one, and I'm pretty sure that's for the title because
Okay.
he's told the story before where they were writing this song and he was walking through the room as John and Chris were writing this song. And one of them said, "Oh, should we call the protagonist of this song?" And Bill Bruford just blurted out Harold Land because apparently he was a jazz musician. I
Oh.
don't know his music at all or anything like that.
Mhm.
But Bill Bruford, even back then, he was very much a jazz guy, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Hmm.
so he came up with the title Harold Land and the name for the protagonist of this song. And so I'm pretty sure that's what he gets the songwriting credit for.
Okay.
But yeah, it's an interesting way to open side two. It's not the sort of bash in the door sort of song as Beyond and Before is,
Hmm.
but it's kind of mid tempo and atmospheric. I like it a lot, and I like the fact that you know you're starting to see a little bit about what John Anderson would be as a lyricist on this song. You know, because he's telling a little story here, and
Hmm.
it you know, as John Anderson's lyrics would become, it's a little impenetrable, but it's still an interesting little journey that Harold Land goes on during this song.
Yes, a journeyman song, and you're right. It does. I feel the same way about. It's kind of a pretense of things to come, as far as the lyrics and the approach. That approach, you will see that again, for
Mm,
sure. Yep. And then every
absolutely.
little thing. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, covering the Beatles, dangerous territory for me because I'm such a huge Beatles fan
yeah,
that I'm always very wary of Beatles covers because there's so many terrible Beatles covers out there.
understandably. Yep.
This is a wonderful Beatles cover because again, they reinvent the song. They took I think they were clever in that they took a song that's a good Beatles song, but a relatively obscure one. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
it's a song on I think side two of Beatles for Sale,
Right,
and
right. It's a deep track for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
and but it's a lovely song, and they turn it into something really grandiose. The arrangement of it is just wonderful.
It's unbelievable. I love when he does the little Down, 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 down. He does the little
Hmm.
drive my car. Is it drive my car? Is that right?
No,
No, no, no,
Day Tripper.
Day Tripper. Sorry, Day
Yeah.
Tripper. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's yeah, he does that in the intro, doesn't he? Yeah. But they make it a bit more of an up-tempo song, and they give it this yes sort of thing that they were doing in these early days, where they would take, a 2 or 3 minute song and turn it into a sort of a 5 or 6 minute song, just by extending it and playing, having these little instrumental parts and all that sort of thing. But I really feel like Yes took this song and brought out some of the potential in it, because I don't know, I love the song as a Beatles song, but I'm not sure that the Beatles necessarily did this song justice.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it was a song that they felt they needed to record for Beatles for Sale, and they just kind of churned it out rather than really working on it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't see it as a single or anything like that, so they didn't spend the extra time on it. And I think Yes show with their version of it, where they do spend the extra time on it, that it is a wonderful Lennon McCartney song that maybe the Beatles themselves didn't quite recognize, the greatness of.
Yeah, yeah, and we know from John Lennon interviews post Beatles where he says, "Oh, that was just a piece of garbage," or like he'll say that about certain songs, and you're like, "What? What are you
Mm,
talking about?" Like he acts like they're not that good because probably they like you to your point, there were times where the Beatles had to rush through and finish the record to get back on tour, and I'm sure they would just say, "Okay, this song's kind of a throwaway song. Let's just put it on the second side." But
mm.
as you said, Yes takes it to a whole other planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, good Beatles covers are few and far between. This is definitely one of them.
Oh,
Love it to death.
yes. Yeah. Agreed.
And then we get Sweetness, which is probably the most gentle thing Yes ever did.
That's
It's
yes.
it feels like that sort of gossamer paper, you feel like if you touch this song, it's going to dissolve. That's how delicate it is.
That's a great description. That's perfect. Yeah.
And this is the very first thing, apparently, that John and Chris worked on together, was this song.
Hmm.
So, important song in that respect, because it really sort of cemented the John and Chris partnership that was the heart of early Yes.
Hmm.
And again, I mean, I don't know what else to say about this song. It's really, really gentle and delicate and fragile.
Yeah. 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 You really get that you get that delicate vocal again that was present on Yesterday and
Mm,
Today from John. I think Peter Banks is doing sort of a little swelling on his guitar, kind of like a wah wah pedal, kind of soft wah wah, and it just like
yeah,
it kind of undulates, and it's beautiful. It's a really nice song. It's a great way to start the writing partnership.
yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And then the record closes out with Survival. And, this song, I feel, really points the way that Yes would be going in the next few years. Because
Absolutely.
this is probably one of the most adventurous songs musically on the album. It's
Hmm.
also one of the longest, being about 6 minutes long.
Hmm.
But, written by John on his own, but the rest of the band really, again, they take the basics of this song and just expand on it and go in these little different directions and that sort of thing. And it's a great way to close the album out, Survival, I really think.
Oh yeah, and isn't this song the one where it kind of it really has this kind of really crazy long introduction that's just instrumental that
Yeah,
and it just goes and it's like where is this going? And all of a sudden it just kind of fades out and it kind of goes into like this other part of the song and it's just such like as you're saying it points the way to where they're going to go because this is pretty intricate song.
well, absolutely. That intro that you're talking about there wouldn't have sounded out of place on a song on Fragile, for example.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Yes, those really intricate runs that they're doing.
Mm.
Oh,
So,
so
I mean, overall, I think this is a really good, really strong debut. You know, got to remember, this is 1969. apart from King Crimson, who brought out, In the Court of the Crimson King, which was just, a fully formed masterpiece,
Mhm.
most of these progressive rock bands were still kind of inventing progressive rock in 1969 and 1970. It
Mhm.
really wasn't until sort of 71, 72 that prog really took the form that we sort of know it today. You think of all those classic prog albums, most of them came out sort of like 1972, 1973.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Mhm.
that's when the form, the genre really sort of coalesced and gelled into what we know it as today.
Mhm.
When you listen to these records from 1969 and 1970, you know, these bands are still inventing prog, as it were.
Mhm.
They're still deciding what directions this new music is going to go.
Mhm.
Progressive rock as a genre, I don't think the term had even been invented in 69, or if it had, it had only just been invented.
Mhm.
Um, we haven't got the sidelong epics and all that sort of thing just yet. But you can see the signposts on this album of not just where Yes would go, but where progressive music in general would go.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, and as you said earlier, when you first start listening to this record, you realize pretty quickly these are really good musicians. And
Yeah.
these guys came to play, and you can feel it, and they're very aggressive on this record. I mean, for a debut, for me, it's very, very confident and aggressive,
Yeah.
in a good way.
And let's just talk about Bill Bruford for a second, because he was 20 years old when he made this record. That's just
Insane.
mind bending that he was only 20 and he was already playing drums
So
like that.
good.
I mean,
Yeah,
he would become an even better drummer as he went along, especially as he got into Crimson and all that sort of thing.
right.
But my goodness, for a 20-year-old, he could play.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question.
Yeah.
He's a driving force on this record. We haven't even talked about it. We talked about everyone else, but he is a driving force on this album, and he like you said, he comes in fully formed. It seems like. I mean, like he's gonna get better, but he's already excellent on the
Mm,
debut.
absolutely. Yeah.
So, I mean, didn't they kind of form themselves around maybe they could be sort of like a Vanilla Fudge type thing where they could reinterpret other artists, which they do.
Yeah,
Um,
that's kind of how they started out. And then John and Chris started writing songs, and I think they went more into that direction. But
yeah.
I do love the fact that you get some covers in these on these early couple of records.
Oh, I do too. I think it's great. It's not so and it's funny because you can tell that they are sort of grasping for their identity. They're still going. I mean, they're doing great stuff, but they're still sort of they're going to get there eventually, but you can feel them on these records just starting out. They're just it's their first foray into making records. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So they I'm sure after the debut and once again the fact that I wanted to also point out the fact that okay, these albums maybe didn't sell that well at the time, but people as you see from the blurb on the back of the first record where he's saying, "Well, I'm going to put my bets on Led Zeppelin and Yes as the new bands that are." So
Mm,
the critics and Melody Maker and things like that were saying, "Oh, this is a band to watch."
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, in 1969, I've heard John Anderson tell a story about he and Chris went to the Marquee Club and saw King Crimson before their first album came out. And Crimson played basically everything that would end up being on In the Court of Crimson King. And apparently John turned to Chris and said, "Man, we got to go back and practice more because these guys are killing us."
I read that story as well. That's a great story. I mean,
Yeah.
the early King Crimson must have been amazing live because I mean, I'm sure they were
Yeah.
because Steve Hackett says the same thing when he saw King Crimson live the first time. He said he was absolutely blown away.
Mm.
And they must have been quite a force.
Yeah. Oh, but they were. I mean, you can get, I mean, the sound quality varies, but there's a 4 CD set of Crimson in 1969 called Epitaph. If
Mhm.
you can ever find it, it's well worth checking out because, yeah, I mean, they were just an incredible live act.
Yeah. Absolutely. And they what a band.
So
But
yeah, we get this record now.
yeah, let's get into the next one. So they're going to say, what are we going to do next for the next record?
I was looking through my record collection. I thought I had both covers, but I only have this one. So
Okay.
I'll have
All
to
right.
sort out a copy of, because again, in Australia, we got the one with Steve Howe on it as the front cover. Because,
Apparently
yeah, I
this was
mean, this
too
one's,
weird for America or something, or too risque
yeah,
or
well, also a little bit naughty. Yeah.
risque.
Because you
Yeah,
got, you know,
exactly.
I mean, and in Australia, especially, we, anything with that sort of thing on it would
Hmm.
either get replaced or censored
Yes.
in the sort of late 60s, early 70s. Like, if you think of the cover for Indelibly Stamped by
Super.
uh,
Hmm.
Supertramp,
Hmm.
that got censored here in
Yep.
Australia.
Roxy Music.
Also yeah, the Roxy Music ones, I don't know. I'll have to check if I've got Australian pressings of
Okay.
those. But no, the other one I was thinking of was have you ever seen the cover of the first Atomic Rooster album?
No, I have not.
Oh,
No.
okay. Well, it's got this like um rooster or this bird in a cage
Mhm.
on the front cover, but the bird's got breasts.
Oh, okay. All right.
And on the I've got the Australian pressing of that, and the breasts got censored. So
Ah, yes. Yes, indeed.
I mean, yeah, I mean, so you had two different covers for the first two albums. I think that's kind of interesting too. Just
Hmm.
whereas going forward, they would have the same cover for every album. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the other one.
for the longest time, this is the one I had. This was all I knew for the cover. So I didn't know there was
Yeah.
actually the artsy cover that was for the UK. So and oh, so before I forget, one more thing.
Mm.
And that is I got introduced to this a lot of these songs from this.
Oh yes.
Yeah, yesterday's. So this is the
Mm.
compilation that came out in 1975 or 4, something like that.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And look at that price, 99 cents.
Oh, nice.
That's when CDs were the thing and everyone's like vinyl's out and nobody wants records anymore.
Mm.
And then I went to the Princeton Record Exchange in New Jersey and got it for 99 cents. So there you go.
Nice.
Yep. So anyway, so go
Yeah, I mean
ahead.
that's a good compilation of those early tracks too, and it's yeah, and it's got a couple of songs that aren't on either of these albums as well, so it's definitely worth seeking out if you're a Yes fan.
Hmm. So I'm sorry, go ahead with Time in a Word. Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean it starts off again with a cover version, a Richie Havens song called "No Opportunity Necessary, No Experience Needed," and it starts off with again, Bill Bruford sort of talked about how this band had no boundaries, it had no rules, as it were. And one of the things they do with this song is they take this Richie Havens song, but then they introduce this music from like a Western film. I think it's called The Big Country or something like
It
that.
is, that's
That little
correct.
little
Yep.
little 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 little, you know,
Yep.
and they throw that into the mix, cowboy music, why not?
Do 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 do. Yeah. Do do
Yeah.
do 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 do. Yep.
But yeah, I mean, the big thing with this album, of course, is it has the orchestra on it. You've got the strings and the brass. And I have mixed feelings about the strings and the brass on this album. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I think that's partly down to the arrangements, which were done by a guy called Tony Cox. But I think also it's partly down to the orchestra that they used, because they didn't get the London Philharmonic or, one of those great session orchestras that existed in London at the time. They're actually using Royal College of Music students.
Youth orchestra.
So,
Yeah. Yes, you're right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a little better than a youth orchestra because I mean, Royal College of Music's a, serious place to
That's
study
true. That's
music,
true.
but they were still students.
Yeah.
So a little bit, apart from anything else, they probably weren't very, the orchestra weren't really experienced at playing in a studio.
Mhm.
So I think that may have a little bit to do with it. You've got a great Hammond organ tone from Tony on this song. It's just wonderful. Absolutely love it. Um, the big problem for me on this song, and we'll get it on a few of the other songs too, is that because of the orchestra, and partly because I think that already a rift was starting to open up, you can barely hear Peter Banks on this song,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
Go and listen to a live version of this. There are live versions of this on YouTube, like played live on TV and that sort of thing, where there's no orchestra, it's just the five of them playing it live. To me, it's so much better because I'm not sure the orchestra adds a lot to this particular song,
Mhm.
but also you can hear Peter Banks and he plays an integral part in playing the song when it's just the five of them. To me, it's a much better version to hear one of those live versions than the version they end up putting on this record. But again, that's just my taste.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I have a BBC live recordings. It's like a double disc or something, and it's all the early
Mm,
a lot of the BBC recordings, and they do this without the and it's you're right. You can all of a sudden Peter Banks is much more to the fore, and his playing is great. It's very tasteful and really well done, and you can see how his complaints, I mean, we're going to get into this at some point. His complaints about the orchestra are legitimate because he basically what he said was the orchestra kept playing with what the guitars and keyboards were doing. So I felt
mm.
like I was getting drowned out and everybody else wasn't.
Well, that's it. That's it. And they weren't particularly inventive arrangements. I
Mhm,
think that's his point because they were just following what the band were doing. You look much, much later. Yes would do a record, an orchestral record called Magnification
mhm,
around year 2000 or 2002, something like that.
mhm.
And those string arrangements and orchestra arrangements are so much better because they don't just follow the band, what the band's playing. They're inventive and they're different and they add to the songs rather than just follow them.
Right, exactly. Yes. Yes, indeed.
So,
So,
but
but
it's telling that after doing this, it would be another 30 odd years before the band would work with an orchestra again.
it is very telling. Absolutely. That's a great point. But I will say I do really enjoy this track. I really
Oh,
do.
it's a great
Yeah.
song. It's a really good cover version again.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, and then we get Then, which is another one of those sort of delicate John Anderson songs. It's really lovely. You do get to hear some of Peter Banks on this song, which is
Yes.
nice.
Mhm.
And even though it's a gentler song, Chris Squire, goodness, that man is already a beast on the bass.
Absolutely. No question. No question. That Rickenbacker
Yeah,
tone. Yep.
yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it?
Mhm.
You know, um, again, this song shows some of the ambition that they would show later in yes, when they were getting into Fragile and Close to the Edge and that sort of thing. I feel it has a bit of similarities, although musically it's quite different. I think the ambitions of this song mirror the sort of ambitions of a song like Survival on the debut album.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
um, and I feel like the quiet final section is really, really effective on this song. It's really,
I love it. Love that. That's like their arrangement skills are just so top
mm,
notch already.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
And so, and then Every Days is the other cover on this album, and it's a Buffalo Springfield cover. Again, early Yes were a vocal band, and I think that shows not just in the harmonies that you get on these songs, but the fact that two of the four covers that they've chose to do, The Birds, Buffalo Springfield, both absolute vocal harmony bands.
right.
So
Right. Yep.
it's interesting that's the sort of direction that they were looking at, and that was what they chose to sort of bring out the vocal interplay between John and Chris. you know it starts off really quiet and soulful, and then you get this wonderful up-tempo instrumental section, which is just, the band showing off their chops.
Yes.
It's great. Um, I do wish they'd left the orchestra out of that bit though. They
Same here.
start playing, the band start playing, and they're doing great cooking. They're the interplay is absolutely wonderful, and then the orchestra comes in and it's like, no, no, we don't need you. Go away.
Who's got the mixer? Turn those down. Turn them down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah. It's
And
interesting too,
then
these covers. I mean, the other thing I was going to mention, you were talking about the Birds in Buffalo Springfield. These songs came out in 67 and 68. It was like the year before. I mean, it wasn't like these were old
mm,
songs. These are pretty recent songs that did just come out the year prior,
yeah,
you know?
absolutely. But you know, if you want to show your vocal interplay, you choose, if you're going to do covers, you're going to choose covers of bands that feature vocal harmonies a lot, aren't you?
Vocal
And
bands.
so,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
and
And then
then the
Sweet
side
Dream.
one, yeah. I mean, this is a classic Yes song. I mean, this is one that they still, in 2004, they were touring like classic lineup with, John and Chris and Steve Howe and Rick Wakeman and Alan White. I saw them the year before in 2003. That was the only time I've got to see the band, and that was that classic lineup too. But in 2004, they were doing this tour where they were sort of delving into all over the catalog for their set list, and they included this in that set list. And there's a DVD, and I think it's come out on CD and vinyl as well in recent years, called Songs from Songus, from
Mhm.
that 2004 tour. And they do a version of Sweet Dreams, and it's so wonderful to hear a song from so early in their catalog.
Yeah, which was so
You know,
rare. That was such a rare outing, right?
yeah,
They never played songs from these records.
very rarely, although there's one other song on this album we'll get to that they did occasionally fish out and
Okay.
play in concert.
Okay.
But I mean, this is a Yes classic, and I don't think it's particularly uh, a coincidence that this is also one of the two songs on this album that doesn't have the orchestra on it.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know,
Yep.
so it's just the five of them, and they cook with gas, and this isn't a super adventurous song like Then or Survival or anything like that, but it's just a really cool, late 60s, early 70s pop song, but with those sort of psychedelic or progressive edges to it. And it just a wonderful, really gutsy vocal from John on this song too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he really gives it some power, and I just absolutely adore the rhythm section on this track. You know, that dun 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 dun. It's just, and Chris is just like you said, they're cooking.
Mm,
Bill and Chris are cooking this whole track.
yeah,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
so great, and the great, like, again, a great, as you pointed out, a great vocal from John. Great vocal.
Yeah.
You know, when he does that dun, 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 anyhow. I just love that You're Gonna Love Again, and all that
Mm,
whole, all those vocal parts are so great too.
yeah. Wonderful. And then you get the Prophet starting side two. Again, side one and side two, you start off with this wonderful Hammond organ from Tony Kaye. And it's not such a growling tone on this one as it is on No Opportunity Necessary, but it's still a wonderful, wonderful Hammond organ intro. Um, and you get a couple of nice jazzy licks from Peter Banks before the first verse kicks in. So again, it's nice to actually hear Peter a little bit on this song. Um, you know, but when the orchestra comes in, I think the orchestra works quite well on this song. But again, poor old Peter gets buried in the mix as soon as the orchestra comes in. And, that's really, really a shame.
Mhm.
Um, so, the problem with the orchestra on this album is sometimes I think it clutters the arrangements. And
Mhm.
I think that's the biggest problem with it.
Yeah, and I really never thought of it the way you described it earlier about the really the lack of imagination on the arrangements for the strings
Mm,
is a real problem on this record. I think that's a great point because it's really not adding anything extra. It's just kind of doing more of what is already happening,
yeah.
you know. So and cluttering up the mix a bit, to your point. I mean, and like Clear Days, the next song is, it's okay. He's trying
Mm,
hard to do like an Eleanor Rigby type thing. I don't know what your feeling is on that track.
yeah. Well, again, the orchestra, Tony is playing some really lovely piano on this song, but you can't hear it because the orchestra is just playing over the top of it.
Ranked, yeah.
Yeah. It's a pretty ballad, but it's not one of the strongest songs on the album, as you say. I think probably one of the best things about it, though, and I don't mean this as a diss, but it's only 2 minutes long.
Yeah, it's very
So
quick.
it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's almost like an interlude you know, between the Prophet and Astral Traveler.
Hmm.
Um, so you know, in that if it had been a 3-4 minute song, I think it would have gotten a bit tiresome. But as a 2 minute song, I like it fine. It's not one of the strongest songs on the album, but it's, as I say, as an interlude, it's quite pleasant.
Yeah, yeah. But then we get to Astral Traveler, which, oh my Lord, one of my favorites.
Yeah, I mean, this is the band sort of delving into that 60s psychedelia, isn't it? This is probably the most psychedelic track on these first two albums.
Mhm.
Um, Peter plays some nice parts in interplay with Tony, and that's what a lot of this record is missing, that I think the first record has in spades, is that interplay between Peter's guitar and Tony's Hammond organ. you
Mhm.
know I think a lot of that gets lost with the orchestra, but again, no orchestra on this song, so it's clear for you to hear all that. So the instrumental middle section is wonderful. But on the verses, Peter Banks is mostly just playing rhythm guitar. He's not really sort of doing much except playing some chords and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Tony is really the star of this record as far as the main instrumentation goes, which is funny considering that just one album later on, he'd be gone.
Not with the band anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad though that they didn't plaster orchestra on this song because it really would have just cluttered it up.
Thank God. Someone was thinking on this one.
Yeah.
I'm happy. I'm happy because it's plenty full with just the band. Plenty.
Yeah. You
Mhm.
know, might be the best song on either of these albums.
I just love it to death. I don't know why I love it so much. I just think it's a
Hmm.
great, it's a well written, well played. I just love that when it just does that ding 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 Astrotra. I just think it's such a cool song. I just love it. I
Hmm.
don't know why I can't put my finger on why, but I just really enjoy it.
Maybe it's because it is probably the most overtly psychedelic thing they ever did, especially on these first two records.
Yeah, it has that quavering vocal, that whatever vocal effect
Hmm.
they're putting on that vocal. Yeah. You're right, it has a psychedelic feel to it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then the album closes out obviously with the title track, which is the other song that I was talking about that they would occasionally fish out and play, or at least do a little piece of in
Okay.
later concerts. They wouldn't necessarily always do the whole song, but sometimes John would just sing a verse and a chorus,
Okay. Okay.
just with Rick sort of tinkling away in the background sort of thing.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful ballad to end the album. It's lovely. It's got those hippy drippy lyrics, but we love them. It's all about love and peace and all that sort of thing. Um, but I mean, I'd rather hear songs about that than songs about, death and destruction and violence and all that sort of thing. But,
Mhm.
we tease those sort of hippy dippy lyrics, but I like them.
Yeah, I enjoy them. I think it's very simple, direct, straightforward, but that's okay sometimes. It doesn't always have to be complicated. And there's a
Mm,
word, and the word is love, and it's right for me. And I think that's a great message.
Yeah.
So I'm all in on this song. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to end the album. And probably, I don't know how you feel, but I feel like maybe this is the song where the orchestral arrangements work the best.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to say the same exact thing. I had that in my notes that the strings work really well on this song.
Yeah.
You know, that outro with the outro going and it just keeps going and the word is love and it's right for me, it's right for me. And then the
Mm,
strings are kind of playing against it a little bit. I think it works really well.
yeah.
So what a
But
great way,
then,
you know.
yeah.
So
But then, of course, obviously, when this album came out, the first of the big changes to Yes would happen because Peter Banks would leave the band. He was unhappy with the orchestra. Uh, so even before they toured this record, he was gone. Steve Howe would come in,
mhm.
and you know, obviously they started evolving into the band that we would know them much better as.
Yeah, I thought I read that he was already out of the band 3 months before this album was released.
Yeah.
So yeah. So he was obviously having problems during the recording of this album that just got worse and
Mm,
worse. And
yeah.
I've seen interviews with him. I've watched interviews with him on YouTube, and he does seem like a pretty outspoken character. So I could see him being pretty forceful with his views, and if he didn't agree with the rest of the band, that being a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And plus the fact that they had seen Steve Howe, I think, play in the band Tomorrow at the time, and they said, "Oh,
Mm,
he's really good." So, but yeah, they quickly became a different band right after this album was released.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
Although, I actually look at the Yes album as being kind of transitional.
Hmm.
Even though people, really hold that album in high regard, I feel like it really is a bridging album between these first two and what they would then go on to do with Fragile and Close to the Edge.
Yeah, I mean, a song like "Seen All Good People," that's a pretty poppy song, honestly. I mean, when you really
Hmm.
listen to that song, it's a pretty pop, straight ahead. It's something like it feels like something that could have been on one of these records.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
you know, so there, I couldn't agree more that that's more of a transitional type album. Maybe they get a little bit more experimental, a little bit more complicated, but not, if you really take a listen to these albums, there's a lot of signposts of things to come that are already in place. Um,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that I was going to mention before I forget because you had mentioned that he brought out "Time in a Word." I could swear that I saw a clip, and I can't remember when. It was a long time ago, but I could swear it was either "Sweet Dreams" or "Time in a Word," where it looks like it's like the 1974 or 5, and he's playing because John's got the beard and the long hair, and he's strumming an acoustic, and he's playing either I want to say it's either "Sweet Dreams" or and it looked like it was the um um, oh god, what's the album with the snake on
The,
it?
the Relayer.
The Relayer tour. That's what it looked like, possibly. And it seemed like he was playing with one of those two songs.
Yep.
But it was a rare occasion that they brought album or songs out from these albums.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm. So yeah, so what would we just talked through these records. So what would your take be if you had to if I always have to do the thing where you choose one. So if you had to
Yeah.
choose one of these over the other, which would you choose?
I think I'd have to go with this one, with
Mhm,
the debut. I feel like you get the band as they were when they first sort of came out. You get a feel for where they're going to go. You get the wonderful, wonderful interplay between those five musicians, but also those vocalists.
mhm,
So, and I feel like on the whole, although as I said, I think Astral Traveler is the best song on either of these albums.
mhm,
That's just my opinion. But I feel song for song, I think Yes is a slightly better album than Time in a Word. And of course, it doesn't have the orchestra, and the orchestra really does drag Time in a Word down for me. But
mhm.
yeah.
Yes, and so I'm going to agree with you. I have a tendency to agree with my guests a lot, but this one is the I tend to agree because when you listen to this album, this is a pure unadulterated yes at right coming out of the gate, and they sound fantastic. They already sound great, and I just love the feel of this record from the beginning to the end. And as we discussed, Time and a Word has some sort of clunkiness to it at times, where
Yeah.
maybe they're over, I would say they're overreaching a bit. They're doing the let's do the what the Moody Blues did in Deep Purple, and let's add some strings, and it kind of feels like they're following a trend a little bit. But they still, like as you said, I still love some songs on Time and a Word. I think there's some great
Mm.
songs on that. But I think overall the debut is a little bit stronger, and it's a little bit more of a undiluted, straight ahead version of that sound,
Yeah, absolutely.
you know. So, um, so yeah, that's that's it. I don't know what else we can say about these albums. I would say that, what is your take on these records? What do you think? A lot of people talk about Close to the Edge and Fragile and Topographic Oceans, and they get talked to death, but nobody really talks about the first two Yes records, because I think people just think, well, they didn't really come to fruition until the Yes album, which we were just talked about. And I disagree. I think there's a lot of great music on these two records. So,
Yep.
um, yeah, so Bicycle Legs, thank you so much. Thanks for your
Always a
report
pleasure.
back. Yeah, really enjoyed talking about these albums with you. And I always like to say, I've been if you don't know Bicycle Legs, you need to go check out his channel, by the way. He's got all sorts of things. He's got Discovers Rush. He's got all these different types of themes on his videos, as far as he's got Discovers Rush, where he goes through the Rush catalog with people and discovers Rush. He's got the In Defense Of, which is my favorite thing that he does. He takes records and does a defense of them, and where he feels records are kind of overlooked, or maybe talked talked down a bit when they really shouldn't be. There's the anniversary videos that he does, where he'll do an anniversary episode where he talks about all sorts of music, and those are really fun today. And he also does rankings as well. So check out his channel. I've been not putting links to the channel, and I need to do that. I'm going to do that on this one. So, as you like to say, check it down on the Diggery Do, I think is what you said, something like that.
The doobly doo.
The doobly do, down below. And hit like and subscribe, please, if you like what you see. It helps the channel. So thanks again. If you stuck with us this long, we really appreciate it. And we will see you next time on Curless Mania. So thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.